Assalamu alaikum. This is Dr. Tazeen Ashraf, your mentor at Study Medic and Study MRCOG, and I'm here with Triple R series for MRCOG Part 1 exam preparation. And this series is about data interpretation and biophysics, which you always get scared by getting these exam questions. So you should have an idea that how the exam questions are coming up, so that when you are covering your subject, you are able to grab these areas appropriately. So I welcome you all at the YouTube channel of Study Medic. If you have not subscribed till now, just subscribe our channel and just click on the bell icon so that you can get all the updates from Study Medic, which is regularly updated about the recent guidelines, recent topics, and that helps you in your exam preparation. The basic idea is to learn and grow together, and we are trying to convert your stress into success by this YouTube series. So put all excuses aside and just remember that you are capable of passing this exam, and keep your passion and dedication alive so that you are enjoying your exam preparation as well as your success journey. The learning objective of this session is that you should be able to evaluate and analyze the exam questions, and you should be able to apply your clinical knowledge while answering the exam questions. And through this session, you should be able to recall that how the exam tested areas are being touched in exam and how I have to grab the subject for my exam preparation. So moving towards first question of the day, which is basically about acid and acid-base metabolism, and you should be able to evaluate and analyze these questions. So question number 1 of the day says that you are asked to review a 63-year-old female who was admitted with shortness of breath on your arrival, and the patient appears drowsy and is on 10 liter of oxygen via mask. You perform an arterial blood gases which reveals the following test results. So PaO2 is 7.0 kilopascals, pH is 7.29, PaCO2 is 9.1, which is towards higher side, and bicarbonate is 26. And the question says that what would be your diagnosis, what this arterial blood gases is telling, whether this is respiratory acidosis, respiratory alkalosis, metabolic acidosis, metabolic alkalosis, or none of these. So now how to evaluate? You should be able to understand that what are the normal values of pH, and by having a look at the pH values, you should be able to understand that what is the primary deficit, whether this is acidosis or alkalosis. Then you will have a look at PaCO2 as well as bicarbonate. If the bicarbonate changes are there, then you should understand that the problem is metabolic, and if PCO2 changes are there, then you should be able to understand that the problem is respiratory. So here you can see that the pH is basically, you should know, this is basically acidosis, as pH is going towards the lower side. Bicarbonate is within the normal range, so this is not a metabolic disorder. Carbon dioxide is raised significantly, which means that this is respiratory disorder. So having a look at the pH, by knowing that what is the primary deficit, pH going towards lower side is showing us that the primary deficit is acidosis. Having a look at the PCO2, which is showing a significant rise, we come to know that okay, this is a respiratory disorder, and bicarbonate being within the normal range, metabolic disturbance is not there, so the answer is respiratory acidosis. The second question of the day says that you are asked to review the full blood count of a 61-year-old patient in the pre-operative clinic, and the results are HP is 9 grams per deciliter, MCV is 118, platelets are 155, and WBC count is 9.4. Okay, you note her past medical history record, a diagnosis of vitiligo 4 years ago, and nothing else. She takes no regular medications. You note routine blood done by GP 1 month earlier shows normal thyroid function, urea and electrolytes and glycosylated hemoglobin. So what is your likely diagnosis? Now here basically they have given you the options as iron deficiency anemia, gastrointestinal bleed, endometrial bleed, Hashimoto's and pernicious anemia. Okay, so what actually is the what is the likely diagnosis here? That is pernicious anemia. The raised MCV is a clue here. And if you go back and if you have a look, you can see that this is 118. MCV won't be raised in cases of iron deficiency anemia or gastrointestinal bleed or endometrial bleed, as they are iron deficiencies anemia, and in those anemias MCV would be towards lower side. Whenever MCV is raised, which is known as megaloblastic anemia, so we have to see that what can be the reason. So here we can find out that pernicious anemia can be the answer, as raised MCV is a buzzword here. Bleeding and iron deficiency typically results in microcytic anemia. Hypothyroidism and pernicious anemia are recognized causes of megaloblastic anemia. The patient is typical age for pernicious anemia to present. In addition, she has had recent TFTs, making hypothyroid unlikely, as there is a tie between the two options only here, that this can be hypothyroidism or this can be pernicious. But it has been stated in the statement that her GP has done all the tests and her thyroid is normal. So Hashimoto's or thyroid dysfunction is also excluded, and we are left with pernicious anemia, which is the answer. Also keep in mind that pernicious anemia has association with other autoimmune conditions such as vitiligo, autoimmune hypothyroidism, and diabetes mellitus, which should be kept in mind. Question number 3 of the day: a 24-year-old gravida 2 para-0 woman is seen in the clinic at 12 weeks. So she is known to have epilepsy with grand mal seizures, for which she is currently on lamotrigine. Her last fit was 1 year ago. Her full blood count results are hemoglobin 9.9, hematocrit is 35%, MCV is 110 femtoliter, MCH is mean corpuscular hemoglobin is 34 picograms, platelets are 198, and total white cell count is 8. So they say that what is the most likely interpretation of these blood count? Whether it is physiological, hydremia of pregnancy, iron deficiency anemia, folate deficiency, beta thalassemia trait, or this is basically hemolytic anemia. So we know that this is not physiological anemia. Okay, so we have to keep in mind that what can be the reason. That if you have a look at the reason, you can see that mean corpuscular volume here is 110 femtoliters. Okay, so this is going towards higher side. So this is basically folate deficiency anemia, in which MCV would be raised. All other parameters would be going towards lower side, but MCV can be raised. So this can be megaloblastic or folate deficiency anemia. Okay, so what actually we are doing for the diagnosis of this? We can check the serum folate levels or red blood cell folate levels, and they will be showing deficiency, which will confirm our diagnosis. Okay, this is the diagnosis. In cases of physiological anemia, that is due to hemodilution. So all the parameters would be going towards lower side. Question number 4 of the day: a 30-year-old woman who regularly takes insulin for diabetes presents with complaints of lethargy and loss of weight. Her blood picture is as follows: hemoglobin 11.4, TLC is 6500, platelets 2.1, TSH is very, very low, which is 0.05. T3 350, T4 is 25. So what actually is the diagnosis? Graves' disease, okay, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, toxic nodule, ketoacidosis, and hypothyroidism. Okay, so one thing if you keep in mind, that In hypothyroid disorders, TSH would be higher. In hyperthyroid disorders, TSH would be lower. Okay, so in this situation, if TSH is towards very, very lower side, so this is hyperthyroidism. And here the answer is Graves' disease, which is also known as toxic diffuse goiter, is an autoimmune disease that affects the thyroid. It frequently results in, and in most common cause of hyperthyroidism, it also often results in enlarged thyroid gland, and signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism can be there, like irritability, muscle weakness, sleeping problems, fast heartbeat, poor tolerance of heat, diarrhea, unintentional weight loss. Other symptoms can also be there, peritibial myxema and eye bulging, a condition which is known as ophthalmopathy, which can also be there. So this is basically a Graves' disease. Okay, so these are the hormonal levels which you can find in various disorders. So just to be on clear side, or just to make your concepts, remember that TSH levels are towards higher side in hypothyroidism, and they are towards lower side in hyperthyroidism. Question number 5 of the day says that what is the lower reference limit for sperm concentration according to WHO criteria? So the normal semen analysis or the normal semen parameters are very, very important, and the options are 1.5 million spermatozoa per ml, 15 million, 50 million, 150 million, and 500 million. Here the answer is basically 15 million spermatozoa per ml is the right answer, but you should be able to understand the other things, that semen volume normally is 1.4, total sperm number is 39 millions. Okay, then total motility should be 42%, should be progressively motile. Okay, and they should have normal motility. Progressive motility is 30%, non-progressive motility is 1%, immotile sperms can be there in 20% of the cases, vitality should be 54%, and normal forms should be 4%. Every parameter can be one exam question, so all the parameters you should be knowing to answer the questions appropriately. Also, sperm abnormalities can be there, that if there are no sperms present in the semen analysis, that is azoospermia. If the count is less than 15 million per ml, that is oligospermia. If it is less than 5 million per ml, that is severe oligospermia. If they are absent or they are of low motility, that is asthenozoospermia. And if the excess abnormal forms are there, that is teratozoospermia. So all these abnormalities as well as normal parameters of semen analysis, any parameter can be asked in the exam, and you should be aware about that. Review a 61-year-old patient blood results in preoperative clinic. They are as follows: corrected calcium 3 millimoles, okay, alkaline phosphatase 120, phosphate is 1.5, and parathyroid hormone is 5. What is the likely diagnosis? So basically here they are asking you that whether it is bone mets, hypothyroidism, myeloma, hypoparathyroidism, or vitamin D deficiency, and it is myeloma. There are number of approaches to interpret the hypercalcemia results, and one method is to start with alkaline phosphatase. A normal alkaline phosphatase will suggest myeloma or calcium alkali syndrome. Myeloma normally has calcium normal or high parathyroid hormone levels, whereas calcium alkali syndrome typically causes low parathyroid hormones. Other disorders that may cause hypercalcemia with normal alkaline phosphatase are thyrotoxicosis or sarcoidosis. However, a raised alkaline phosphatase is also common with these two conditions, so it is unlikely the exam would ask this. So these conditions are associated with low parathyroid hormones. So here alkaline phosphatase, you can say, is a buzzword for you to understand that if it is normal, then either it is myeloma or it is calcium alkali syndrome. This exam question is also, it is very, very important that you should be able to interpret the results which you, of syphilis. They are very important and they are very high yield area of exam tested area. A 34-year-old woman has just returned to the UK following missionary work in the northern parts of South America. She is delighted to be pregnant and presents for booking at 12 weeks of gestation. After counseling, she agrees to have routine blood investigations, including screening for syphilis, and the results are VDRL is reactive, Treponema pallidum agglutination is non-reactive, and fluorescent treponema antibody absorption test is non-reactive. So what is the most likely appropriate interpretation of these results? Consistent with treponemal infection, diagnosis of latent syphilis, indicative of early primary syphilis, biologically false positive, and suggest a past treated infection. So now basically what I want to tell you that each option can be your potential exam question, and you should be able to understand all these options. Here the answer is biologically false positive. So it is basically that reactive VDRL without confirmatory tests being positive. This is biologically false positive test result. As you can see that only VDRL is positive and the other two tests, they are negative. So it is false positive test result. So this is basically the interpretation that if VDRL is negative and treponema pallidum heme agglutination test is negative, and then antibodies are positive, then it is basically the primary infection. In late infection, all three would be positive. If it is latent treated syphilis, then VDRL will become negative and other two tests, they would be positive. Biologically false, only VDRL would be positive and others would be negative. And if there is no past or present infection, then every test would be negative. This interpretation is very, very important for all of you to know about your exam, as this is a very famous tested area, and you should be able to interpret. If you are having a patient in your clinic and they are coming to you with these test results, so you should be able to interpret their labs to tell them the correct diagnosis. So that is very, very important for you. Which of the following might you expect to see on the ECG of a patient with hypocalcemia? In hypocalcemia, whether it can be delta wave, prolonged PR interval, ST elevation, peak T wave, or long QT interval. So here basically the answer would be that long QT interval would be there. Okay, hypokalemia is associated with QT prolongation. Hyperkalemia is associated with peaked T wave. Okay, so it is at peak and that is hyper. Hyper is peak. Okay, so this would be peaked T wave. Hypocalcemia is QT prolongation, and then hypercalcemia is QT shortening. Okay, so calcemia is basically associated with QT prolongation and QT shortening, which you should keep in mind. What is the dye, contrast dye, which is used in the MRI scans? And they have given you various dyes: iodine, barium, thallium, gadolinium, and technetium. And then you should remember that this is gadolinium, which is the contrast which is being used in the MRI. Frequency of current used in the electrosurgery unit, this is just a number which you have to remember, that whether it is from 1 kilohertz to 1.5 megahertz. Okay, so 1000 kilohertz to 1.5, 1000 kilohertz to 4 megahertz, 4000 kilohertz to 9 megahertz, and 800 kilohertz to 9 megahertz. So here the answer is basically 1000 kilohertz to 4 megahertz is the answer which you have to opt. 28-year-old Asian woman, gravida 2 para 2, at 26 weeks of gestation. Her BMI is 36. Glucose tolerance test report is as follows. Fasting glucose level is 4.7 and 2 hours glucose is 7.4. So what is the diagnosis? So basically these values are falling within the normal range. Okay, so she is having all the values within normal range. So this is basically normal interpretation of glucose tolerance test. Which laser can be used in gynecological surgery is invisible without an aim beam and cannot be transmitted down a fiber optic cable? Okay, so this laser, which is basically, it is the carbon dioxide laser, which generates an invisible light and requires an aiming bead, usually helium neon. It cannot be transmitted down a fiber optic cable and it is absorbed by water. It is used in cervical treatments but is limited by the fact that it does not work in presence of blood. Question number 13 of the day says that optimum intra-abdominal pressure should be achieved to insert the primary trocar safely at laparoscopy. So what is the optimum pressure range? Whether it is 10 to 15 millimeters of mercury, it is 15 to 18 millimeters of mercury, 20 to 25 millimeters of mercury, or 20 to 25 millimeters of water. So it is basically 20 to 25 millimeters of mercury. So you have to remember the correct you have to remember the units as well. And intra-abdominal pressure 20 to 25 millimeter of mercury results in increased splinting. This allows the trocar to move more easily through the abdominal layers. No adverse effect on the respiratory function is reported using such pressure range. Once the primary trocar is inserted, the secondary trocar can be visually introduced and then the pressure can be reduced. A 53-year-old woman presents with chronic renal failure and potassium concentration of 5.8, and electrosurgery, electrocardiography has been requested, and the ECG features can occur with potassium concentration, flat T wave and ST depression, flat T wave and ST elevation, tall T wave, okay, and ST depression. So tall T wave and wide QRS complex, and tall U wave and ST depression. So here, first of all, you have to see that potassium concentration, it is towards the higher side. So it is hyperkalemia. So with hyperkalemia, basically what actually is happening, this is tall T wave and wide QRS complex would be there. So these are important to note because sudden cardiac arrest can occur if corrective action is not taken to correct it. So with regard to this spirometry, this is very, very important spirometry graph, which you should be able to know that which area is representing what, which volumes and lung volumes are represented in this. So they are asking that with regard to spirometry trace below, what lung volume is represented by E. Okay, so here we can see that whether it is vital capacity, tidal volume, total lung capacity, inspiratory reserve volume, or expiratory. So basically here it is showing tidal volume, but if you have a look at this, you should be able to understand that basically this is you can see that inspiratory reserve volume is here, which is, so tidal volume is, you can see that this area is the tidal volume, then this is expiratory reserve volume, and this is residual volume. So these four volumes are there. So if they ask you what is the inspiratory capacity is basically inspiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume. If they ask that what is functional residual capacity is expiratory reserve volume plus residual volume. And if they ask you what is vital capacity, so vital capacity is equal to inspiratory capacity. Okay, vital capacity is basically, vital capacity, you can say inspiratory capacity plus expiratory reserve volume, or you can say that vital capacity is equal to inspiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume plus expiratory reserve volume. Okay, so this is basically the vital capacity, and total lung capacity can be vital capacity plus residual volume. It can be inspiratory capacity plus functional residual capacity, or total lung capacity. It can be inspiratory reserve volume, tidal volume, expiratory reserve volume, and residual volume. So this whole is basically the total lung capacity, which you should be knowing. So this is very, very important exam tested area, and you should be able to interpret the spirometry appropriately to mark your answer right in your exam. With this, I wish you all the very best for your upcoming exam, and have a great day. Thank you.